3 years ago, I deliberately made myself homeless for 30 days. No safety net, no backup plan. People called me crazy, but I was testing Nietzsche's theory that voluntary hardship awakens dormant human capacities. What happened next transformed my understanding of potential forever. Most personal development advice focuses on making things easier. But what if that approach is backward? What if the comfort you're seeking is precisely what's keeping you small? Today I'm sharing the philosophical framework that explains why your brain's desire for comfort is secretly sabotaging your greatest possibilities. The comfort paradox. What if the very things you avoid are the keys to your evolution? Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch isn't about becoming superhuman. It's about transcending the limitations you've accepted without question. The person who grows beyond their current self isn't someone with special advantages, but someone who refuses to let comfort dictate their choices. Consider how often you've postponed something difficult because it felt uncomfortable. That hesitation isn't just a momentary decision. It's a pattern that shapes who you become. Studies on cognitive flexibility show that when people consistently choose comfort, their brains actually lose the ability to adapt. The neural pathways for handling challenges weaken from lack of use. A study tracking lottery winners found that within 2 years, most reported lower life satisfaction than before their windfall. Without meaningful challenges, their sense of purpose eroded. Now contrast that with figures like Nelson Mandela, who emerged from 27 years in prison with greater resilience and clarity. His capacity didn't come despite the hardship. It was forged by it. The same principle applies to your daily life. Every time you avoid a difficult conversation, put off a challenging project, or settle for familiar routines, you're not preserving your energy. You're shrinking your potential. Neuroscience reveals an uncomfortable truth. Comfort reduces your brain's plasticity over time. When you stop learning new skills or facing unfamiliar situations, your neural networks become more rigid. MRI scans show that people who frequently engage in challenging activities maintain greater cognitive flexibility as they age. The brain, much like a muscle, atrophies without resistance. What have you been avoiding because it feels uncomfortable? Maybe it's starting that business idea, having that overdue conversation, or committing to a tennis routine. The resistance you feel isn't a sign you shouldn't do it. It's the exact signal that growth lies on the other side. Comfort creates the illusion of safety, but it's a fragile illusion. Life inevitably brings challenges, and without practice navigating difficulty, you become more vulnerable when they arrive. The paradox is this: seeking comfort today makes you less equipped to handle discomfort tomorrow. People who regularly expose themselves to manageable stress, whether through learning new skills, physical training, or voluntary hardship, develop a resilience that permeates every area of life. Their tolerance for uncertainty increases. Their capacity for focus deepens. What looks like struggle from the outside is actually the process of expanding their operating system. 3. Your brain's resistance to growth. Why does your mind sabotage the changes you consciously want to make? The answer lies in how your brain conserves energy. Your neural pathways prefer familiar patterns, not because they're optimal, but because they're efficient. The predictive processing model explains this clearly. Your brain constantly tries to minimize surprise by relying on established routines. When you attempt something new, it triggers what neuroscientists call prediction error, a mismatch between expectation and reality. Though essential for learning, your brain treats this mismatch as a threat worth resisting. MRI scans show what happens when you try unfamiliar tasks. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, lights up with heightened activity. This isn't a flaw in your biology. It's an ancient survival mechanism. Early humans benefited from caution when facing the unknown. But in modern life, this same wiring tricks you. That resistance you feel before starting a challenging project, learning a skill, or having a difficult conversation, it's not laziness, it's your brain interpreting uncertainty as danger. Here's where neuroplasticity changes everything. Your brain isn't fixed, it rewires itself based on what you repeatedly do. A study on London taxi drivers revealed that navigating complex streets physically enlarged their hippocampi, the regions responsible for spatial memory. The same principle applies to any skill or mindset. Every time you push through reluctance and engage with something difficult, you reshape your neural architecture. The discomfort isn't proof you can't do it. It's evidence your brain is expanding its capacity. Carol Dweck's research on mindsets reveals another layer. People with FXED beliefs see challenges as threats to their self-image, proof of what they can't do. Those with growth mindsets interpret the same discomfort as evidence of progress. The difference isn't innate talent, it's how they frame the sensation of effort. One group sees struggle as failure, the other as necessary fuel, which explains why some people avoid challenges while others seek them. They've learned to read their internal signals differently. When you feel resistance, you're not actually avoiding the task, you're avoiding the discomfort of cognitive dissonance. Your brain wants to maintain consistency between your self-concept and your actions. Attempting something new creates tension between who you are and who you might become. That's why positive affirmations often fail. They clash too sharply with existing beliefs. Real change happens through gradual exposure. Each small step rewires both your skills and your identity. Consider the case of stroke patients relearning movement. At first, their brains interpret the damaged neural pathways as the only possible routes. Therapists use constraint-induced movement therapy, forcing patients to use affected limbs despite initial frustration. Over time, new pathways form. The process mirrors any personal growth. Early attempts feel unnatural because they are, until repetition makes them automatic. What we call laziness is often just the brain's energy-saving mode in action. A study on habit formation found that behaviors become automatic after about 66 days of consistent practice. Before that threshold, every repetition requires conscious effort. Afterward, the behavior feels effortless as the brain shifts it to efficient neural pathways. This explains why good habits eventually stick, but only if you persist through the initial discomfort. The implication is profound. Resistance isn't a stop sign, it's a landmark. That tension you feel when facing a challenge isn't proof you shouldn't proceed. It's confirmation you're doing something worthwhile. People who excel in any field haven't eliminated discomfort. They've learned to interpret it differently. They recognize that hesitation doesn't mean turn back, but rather, this is where growth happens. Neuroplasticity works both ways. Avoiding challenges doesn't just stall progress, it weakens existing capacities. Studies on retirees show that those who cease challenging their minds experience faster cognitive decline. The phrase "use it or lose it" applies to your mental faculties as much as your muscles. When you stop stretching your abilities, your brain prunes unused connections, making future learning harder. The safety illusion. Nassim Taleb coined the term anti-fragile to describe systems that gain from disorder. Your immune system works this way. When you avoid all germs, you don't become healthier, you become more vulnerable. Children raised in overly sterile environments develop more allergies and autoimmune disorders. The same principle applies to psychological resilience. A 2021 study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology found that people who faced moderate childhood adversity outperformed others in problem-solving under stress. Controlled exposure to difficulty created mental antibodies. Therapists use a parallel concept called stress inoculation. Just as vaccines introduce weakened viruses to build immunity, gradual exposure to manageable stress toughens the mind. Veterans with PTSD show remarkable recovery rates when exposed to traumatic memories in safe, controlled environments. Their brains learn that they can handle what once overwhelmed them. You don't develop this capacity by avoiding discomfort. You develop it by moving through it systematically. Yet modern life increasingly removes these necessary stressors. A longitudinal study tracking risk tolerance across generations found that millennials and Gen Z report significantly higher anxiety about everyday risks than baby boomers did at the same age, despite living in objectively safer conditions. Overprotective parenting, digital insulation from uncertainty, and cultural avoidance of discomfort combine to create what psychologists call fragility paradox. The safer we make our environments, the more threatened we feel by minor challenges. Your brain interprets complete safety as a signal to lower its defenses. When you never face difficulties, small setbacks feel catastrophic. Researchers at the University of Buffalo studied people who'd experienced no significant adversity. They found these individuals reported higher stress levels during minor daily hassles than those who'd overcome moderate hardships. Without prior challenges to establish reference points, the mind magnifies small troubles. Voluntary discomfort serves as an insurance policy. Cold showers, fasting, unfamiliar social situations, these deliberate practices aren't masochism. They're neurological training. A 2020 neuroimaging study showed that people who regularly engaged in voluntary discomfort displayed calmer amygdala responses during unplanned, stressful events. Their brains had learned that discomfort signals growth, not danger. The military understands this principle. Navy SEAL candidates undergo brutal training not because the military enjoys suffering, but because they know combat will test those who break under controlled conditions rather than uncontrolled ones. Ordinary life follows the same rules. The person who avoids difficult conversations crumbles when conflict becomes unavoidable. The one who dodges physical challenges struggles when health demands effort. Modern conveniences have severed the connection between effort and reward. Food appears without hunting, warmth without free building, answers without critical thinking. Your brain's reward system evolved for a world where comfort required effort. Now that comfort is constant, the system misfrees. Studies link easy dopamine access, through social media, processed foods, and passive entertainment, to reduced motivation for meaningful challenges. Breaking invisible barriers. You've likely accepted limits that don't actually exist. These false ceilings form when you mistake your past performance for your potential. A Harvard longitudinal study found most people stop developing new skills after age 30, not because they can't learn, but because they settle into routines that no longer challenge them. Your comfort zone isn't static. It shrinks gradually each time you avoid difficulty. The 80% rule suggests we typically operate far below our true capacity. When researchers measured maximum physical output versus everyday effort, they found people use less than 80% of their possible strength, endurance, or cognitive power in daily life. Your brain creates buffers to conserve energy, making you think you're at your limit long before you actually are. Marathon runners experience this phenomenon. What feels like total exhaustion at mile 20 often gives way to renewed energy by mile 22. The limit wasn't physical, it was perceptual. Identifying your personal comfort boundaries requires honest observation. Try discomfort journaling for 1 week. Each time you feel resistance, avoiding a task, hesitating before action, or choosing the easier path, record it. Patterns will emerge. You might notice you avoid intellectual challenges more than physical ones, or vice versa. One person consistently stops working when tasks require creative problem solving. Another shies away from social situations that demand vulnerability. These avoidance patterns reveal where you've placed artificial ceilings. Systematically expanding these boundaries works like strength training. If you can comfortably hold a conversation with strangers for FVE minutes, aim for 7. If you normally work until a task feels difficult, continue for 10% longer. The key lies in small, consistent pushes beyond your current stopping points. Studies on expert performers show they don't have extraordinary willpower. They simply practice at the edge of their abilities daily. A pianist doesn't master a piece by playing what's already easy. Growth happens in that narrow zone between comfort and overwhelm. Perceived limits often stem from single experiences that created mental barriers. Maybe you failed at public speaking once and decided you're bad at it. Perhaps an early rejection made you avoid certain opportunities. These become FX Ed narratives, though they're just data points. Cognitive behavioral therapy techniques show that disproving these beliefs through controlled exposure can reshape self-concept. Someone afraid of heights starts by standing on a chair, then a ladder, then a low roof. Each success rewrites the old story. Consider how children learn. They fall hundreds of times while learning to walk, yet persist because they haven't yet learned the concept of failure. Adults, burdened by past experiences, often quit after 1 or 2 attempts. Research on skill acquisition shows adults actually learn faster than children when they maintain this experimental mindset. The difference isn't ability, it's willingness to tolerate early awkwardness. Your brain creates resistance when approaching perceived limits as a protective mechanism. It's not that you can't do more. Your mind is trying to conserve energy based on outdated information. A study on fatigue perception found that when cyclists were tricked into thinking they'd only completed half the race, they could suddenly push far beyond their supposed limits. The exhaustion was partly an illusion created by expectations. Physical therapists use a technique called load progression to rehabilitate injuries. They add small amounts of weight or resistance each session, staying just below the threshold that would cause re-injury. You can apply this same principle to mental and emotional growth. If networking events feel overwhelming, start by introducing yourself to 1 new person per week. If creative work intimidates you, begin with 10 minutes of free writing daily. The consistent incremental challenge expands your capacity without triggering overwhelm. Designing discomfort growth requires deliberate design, not random effort. Hans Selye's concept of optimal stress explains why most self-improvement attempts fail. Too little challenge produces no growth, while too much creates overwhelm. The sweet spot lies just beyond your current abilities, far enough to stretch you, but not so far that you break. This principle applies whether you're building physical strength, learning a language, or developing emotional resilience. Consider two approaches to language learning. Traditional classroom methods often move too slowly, keeping students in comfortable repetition. Full immersion throws learners into overwhelming situations where they can't communicate basic needs. The most effective programs use graded exposure, starting with simple conversations and gradually increasing complexity. Research shows this approach yields faster progress with less frustration. The brain learns best when challenged at the right increment. The 5% rule offers a practical method for applying this. Instead of drastic changes, increase difficulty in small measurable steps. If you currently run 3 miles comfortably, aim for 3.15 next time. Writing 500 words daily? Try 525. These tiny jumps feel manageable while compounding over time. A study on habit formation found that participants who increased their goals by 5% weekly were 3 times more likely to maintain progress after 6 months compared to those making larger leaps. Successful people understand this principle intuitively. Author Haruki Murakami wakes at 4 a.m. to write, maintaining the same disciplined routine daily. Olympic athletes periodize their training, alternating intense sessions with recovery. These aren't random acts of discipline. They're carefully engineered systems. Case studies reveal that high performers don't rely on motivation. They create structures that make growth inevitable. A concert pianist might practice the same measure 100 times. Not because it's enjoyable, but because they've designed a process that demands it. To build your own challenge architecture, start by identifying baseline capacities. How many cold calls can you make before avoidance kicks in? How long can you focus before distraction wins? Establish these numbers honestly. They're your foundation. Next, create incremental progressions. If your current limit is FVE uncomfortable conversations per week, schedule 6. The key lies in consistent, measurable expansion. Track both quantitative and qualitative measures. A weightlifter notes not just pounds lifted but form quality under fatigue. A public speaker counts not just presentations given, but moments of authentic connection made during them. This dual tracking prevents empty repetition. You're not just doing more but better. Research on deliberate practice emphasizes quality over quantity. 10 minutes of fully focused practice often yields more progress than an hour of distracted effort. Structure discomfort across multiple dimensions. Physical challenges like cold exposure or fasting, cognitive challenges, learning new skills, and emotional challenges, difficult conversations, all strengthen different resilience muscles. A 2022 study found that people who engaged in varied discomfort practices showed greater adaptability in unpredictable situations. Their brains had learned to interpret discomfort as a signal to engage rather than retreat. Timing matters. Your willpower depletes throughout the day, so schedule challenging tasks when your energy peaks. Morning might be best for creative work, while afternoon could suit routine tasks requiring less focus. The military uses stress exposure training, gradually introducing recruits to challenging scenarios at optimal times in their development. You can apply this principle by aligning challenge types with your natural rhythms. Recovery is part of the design. Just as muscles grow during rest between workouts, neural pathways strengthen during downtime. A study on skill acquisition showed that participants who took regular breaks during practice sessions learned faster than those who practiced continuously. Build deliberate recovery into your challenge cycles. Days for reflection, periods for consolidation. Growth happens in the space between challenge and rest. Rewiring resistance. Your resistance to discomfort isn't a personal failing. It's a conditioned response you can reprogram. Cognitive behavioral therapy calls this process discomfort reframing. The way you label an experience changes how your body responds to it. Call something stress and your body prepares for threat. Call the same sensation excitement and it becomes fuel. A Harvard study proved this by having participants relabel their anxiety before public speaking. Those who framed their racing hearts as excitement performed better and reported higher confidence. Their bodies responded to the words they chose. Language shapes reality at a physiological level. When you say, "I can't handle this," your nervous system obeys. But when you say, "This is challenging but temporary," your stress response moderates. Researchers found that people who described difficult tasks as opportunities rather than threats showed lower cortisol spikes. The event didn't change, their framing of it did. This explains why two people can face identical challenges with radically different experiences. One sees a crisis, the other sees a chance to grow. Alia Crumb's research on stress mindsets reveals more. In one study, participants watched videos about stress's effects. Those who learned stress enhances performance later handled challenges better than those taught stress is harmful. Their actual stress levels didn't differ, only their interpretation did. Your body follows your mind's lead. When you believe discomfort strengthens you, it does. When you believe it weakens you, that becomes true too. You can train yourself to reinterpret physical signals of discomfort. A racing heart before a presentation isn't panic. It's your body preparing for peak performance. Sweaty palms aren't weakness, they're evidence of engagement. Navy SEALs use this technique during Hell Week. They learn to see exhaustion as proof they're pushing limits, not hitting them. This reframing doesn't deny the difficulty. It changes what the difficulty means. Creating positive associations with challenge requires deliberate practice. Start small. When you feel resistance before a workout, say, "This is making me stronger," out loud. When tackling a complex problem, note, "My brain is growing right now." These verbal cues reinforce new neural pathways. Over time, the sensations you once avoided become signals of progress. A study on marathon runners found that elite athletes reported enjoying the burn of muscle fatigue. Amateurs dreaded the same feeling. The difference was years of conditioned association. The process works like taste acquisition. Children often dislike bitter foods like coffee or dark chocolate. Through repeated exposure paired with positive experiences, these favors become pleasurable. Discomfort follows the same pattern. At first, it's unpleasant. With consistent positive framing, your brain starts associating it with growth. Researchers call this effort-driven rewards. The satisfaction comes not despite the struggle, but because of it. Physical cues reinforce this shift. When facing a challenge, adopt a power pose for 30 seconds. Stand tall, shoulders back. Studies show this posture increases testosterone and decreases cortisol. Your body's stance tells your brain you're capable. Combine this with verbal affirmations like, "I choose this challenge," to create a feedback loop. The more you practice this sequence, the more automatic it becomes. Tracking progress solidifies the new mindset. Keep a growth log where you record challenges faced and skills gained. Review it weekly. Seeing concrete evidence of improvement rewires your perception of difficulty. A study on weightlifters found those who tracked small strength increases reported enjoying workouts more than those who only focused on end goals. The discomfort became meaningful because it was visibly connected to progress. Social reinforcement accelerates the change. Surround yourself with people who view challenges positively. Their attitudes will influence yours. Research shows that when placed in groups that interpret stress as enhancing, individuals adopt that mindset within weeks. Conversely, chronic complainers reinforce avoidance patterns. Choose your influences deliberately. The momentum paradox. You've been told motivation comes first, that you need to feel inspired before taking action. Behavioral activation therapy proves the opposite. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. Waiting to feel ready is how people get stuck in cycles of avoidance. The more you delay, the harder starting becomes. Newton's first law applies to psychology as much as physics. An object at rest stays at rest, while an object in motion stays in motion. Your mind resists change initially, but once moving, tends to keep going. Procrastination isn't laziness, it's inertia. A study on task initiation found that 92% of participants reported the hardest part was simply beginning. Once they started, continuing felt manageable. This explains why people often work past their planned stopping points. The initial energy required to overcome static friction exceeds the energy needed to maintain momentum. Your brain conserves resources by resisting new actions, but once engaged, adapts to the activity. The 5-minute rule leverages this principle. Commit to working on a task for just FVE minutes. After that, you can stop. Research shows that 80% of people continue past the FVE minute mark once they've started. The brief commitment reduces the mental barrier to initiation. Writers use this method to overcome blocks, often fending they write for hours after agreeing to just one paragraph. The action generates its own motivation. Behavioral momentum builds through small wins. A study on habit formation tracked participants starting exercise routines. Those who began with trivial actions, like putting on workout clothes, were 3 times more likely to complete full workouts than those aiming for immediate intensity. The minor action created psychological momentum. Each small step reduces resistance to the next. This explains why successful people often have pre-performance rituals. The ritual isn't superstition, it's a momentum trigger. Comfort seeking backfrees over time. Avoiding discomfort today increases tomorrow's resistance. A University of Pennsylvania study followed 2 groups, one avoiding challenging tasks, the other tackling them immediately. After 6 weeks, the avoidance group reported higher stress levels when facing unavoidable challenges. Their brains had learned to amplify discomfort through repeated evasion. The action takers developed tolerance, fending similar tasks progressively easier. The brain's predictive coding system explains this. When you consistently avoid discomfort, your mind learns to expect distress in those situations. Each avoidance reinforces the prediction, but when you act despite discomfort, the brain updates its expectations. MRI scans show that after repeated exposure to challenging tasks, the amygdala's threat response diminishes. The task hasn't changed. Your brain's interpretation of it has. Starting creates a cascade of neurological changes. Dopamine releases when you initiate action, creating a sense of reward. Blood flow increases to relevant brain regions, sharpening focus. A study on creative work found that inspiration consistently arrived after starting, not before. Participants who began with no ideas often entered flow states within 15 minutes. The act of working generated the very motivation they'd waited for. This principle applies to all growth. Want to become more sociable? Speak first, then confidence follows. Need to build discipline? Act first, and motivation catches up. Nietzsche recognized this when he wrote, "Do not wait for a feeling to do the right thing. The doing itself produces the right feeling." Modern psychology confirms his insight. Action rewires your emotional responses over time. The hardest part is always the first move. Once you begin, momentum carries you. A study on behavioral change showed that completing just 20% of a task often leads to completion. The initial effort creates psychological commitment. This explains why people frequently finish books they're 20% through but abandon those at 5%. That small investment changes their relationship to the task. Cultural comfort traps. The systems surrounding you weren't built for your growth. They were built for your consumption. Sociologist Rob Henderson coined the term luxury beliefs to describe ideas that signal social status while actually harming those who adopt them. The belief that comfort equals happiness functions exactly this way. It sounds progressive, but it quietly erodes your capacity for meaningful achievement. Convenience culture sells you ease while delivering stagnation. Post-war Japan offers a stark contrast to modern comfort traps. Citizens who rebuilt Tokyo from rubble in the 1950s developed remarkable resilience through necessity. Today, that same society produces the hikikomori phenomenon. Over 1 million young adults who withdraw completely into their bedrooms, often for years. The difference isn't genetics or work ethic, it's environment. When societies remove all necessity for struggle, they unintentionally remove opportunities for growth. Depression rates have risen alongside increasing comfort. A WHO study shows global depression rates increased 18% between 2005 and 2015, with the sharpest rises in developed nations. Anxiety disorders show similar patterns. This isn't coincidence, it's consequence. Your brain evolved to solve problems, not to exist in frictionless environments. Remove meaningful challenges and the mind turns inward, creating its own distress. Some cultures recognize this danger. In Finland, parents leave babies to nap outside in sub-zero temperatures, believing it builds resilience. Norwegian friluftsliv, open-air living, emphasizes voluntary exposure to nature's discomforts. These aren't masochistic traditions, they're cultural wisdom about human needs. Studies on Scandinavian children show they develop greater self-regulation and lower anxiety rates than peers from more sheltered backgrounds. The modern world conspires against this understanding. Algorithmic feeds deliver content that confirms your existing views. Delivery apps eliminate even minor inconveniences. Schools remove competitive elements to protect self-esteem. Each intervention seems harmless alone, but together they create an ecosystem that weakens your ability to handle life's inevitable difficulties. A study tracking college students' coping skills found that those with highly protective upbringings showed significantly lower distress tolerance when facing normal adult challenges. You can see this in language shifts. Terms like triggering and safe spaces originally described clinical therapeutic environments. Now they've expanded to everyday life, framing normal discomfort as something to avoid rather than navigate. The result isn't greater safety, it's greater fragility. Psychologists call this concept creep, where protective concepts expand until they hinder normal functioning. Countercultural movements push back. The growing popularity of obstacle course races like Tough Mudder reflects a hunger for voluntary challenge. Digital minimalism trends show people rejecting constant connectivity. These aren't rejections of progress, they're course corrections. Participants report feeling more alive during these discomfort experiences than in months of routine comfort. Opting out requires deliberate strategy. Start by identifying comfort traps in your environment. Does your smartphone remove all moments of boredom? Do meal kits eliminate meal planning? These conveniences seem harmless, but each one reduces your opportunities to practice patience, problem-solving, or creativity. Reintroduce friction where it serves you. Cook without recipes sometimes. Take the longer walking route. These small choices rebuild atrophied capacities. Social media presents a particular challenge. Platforms optimize for engagement, not growth. A study comparing social media use to mental health found that passive scrolling correlates with increased depression, while active creation correlates with improved well-being. The difference lies in agency. One approach consumes comfort, the other creates challenge. Financial systems also promote comfort traps. Easy credit lets you avoid saving. Subscription services eliminate even the minor hardship of repurchasing. These systems aren't evil, they're just indifferent to your growth. The person who never learns delayed gratification becomes vulnerable to every marketing message promising instant satisfaction. Education systems increasingly prioritize comfort over growth. Grade inflation protects students from failure, but robs them of resilience. A Stanford study found that students who received artificially inflated grades in early coursework struggled disproportionately when facing later challenges. Their academic immune systems hadn't developed properly. The alchemy of adversity. What if the struggles you've been avoiding hold the very lessons you need? Research on post-traumatic growth reveals a paradox. People who overcome significant adversity often report higher life satisfaction afterward than those who never faced such challenges. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun found that 70% of trauma survivors reported positive psychological changes, from deeper relationships to renewed purpose. The adversity didn't just hurt them, it transformed them. Now contrast this with studies on unchallenged lives. Longitudinal research tracking overprotected children into adulthood shows higher rates of anxiety and lower problem-solving ability. Without opportunities to test their limits early, they struggle when life inevitably becomes difficult. The pattern repeats across domains. Students shielded from academic failure underperform in competitive environments. Employees who never face criticism plateau in their careers. Comfort doesn't prepare you for reality, it leaves you vulnerable when reality arrives. History's most impactful figures almost universally endured periods of intense struggle. Compare the biographies of Theodore Roosevelt, who transformed personal tragedies into political triumphs, with those of his era's privileged elites who faded into obscurity. Or modern examples, J.K. Rowling's years on welfare preceding Harry Potter's creation, or Malala Yousafzai's activism growing from violent oppression. Their challenges became catalysts not because suffering is noble, but because it forces growth when approached consciously. Existential psychologists call this necessary suffering, the unavoidable difficulties that shape identity. Viktor Frankl observed in concentration camps that those who found meaning in their suffering survived longer than those who didn't. His logotherapy approach later showed that people tolerate almost any hardship if they believe it serves a purpose. The key lies not in seeking pain, but in extracting value from inevitable struggles. You can cultivate this skill through deliberate reflection. After facing a challenge, ask 3 questions. What did this reveal about my strengths? What resources did I discover I had? How might this help me or others in the future? A study on emergency responders found that those who practiced such reflection recovered from trauma faster and reported greater professional growth. The same method works for everyday difficulties: a failed project, a painful rejection, a financial setback. The event becomes formative when you mine it for lessons. Comfort often prevents this self-discovery. People in consistently easy environments rarely confront their true capacities. A study comparing risk-takers with risk avoiders found the former group had more accurate self-assessments of their abilities. They'd tested their limits while the others could only guess. Your potential remains theoretical until challenged. This explains why people often surprise themselves during crises. The comfort of normal life never demanded their full capabilities. The process mirrors metallurgy. Raw ore becomes strong steel through repeated heating and hammering. Similarly, psychologist K. Anders Ericsson's research on expertise shows that deliberate practice, targeted, effortful repetition, creates mastery. The discomfort isn't incidental, it's the mechanism of transformation. Muscles tear slightly to grow stronger. Neural pathways break down before reorganizing more efficiently. Growth requires this temporary destabilization. Retrospective studies reveal a consistent pattern. When people reflect on their lives, they rarely cherish moments of ease. The memories that surface are typically challenges overcome. The marathon finished, the degree earned despite obstacles, the business rebuilt after failure. A Harvard study asking elderly participants about meaningful life events found 83% described difficult experiences that led to growth. Comfort fades from memory, but transformation endures. This explains why voluntary hardship traditions persist across cultures. From vision quests to monastic asceticism, humans have long recognized that chosen struggles cultivate resilience. Modern science confirms this intuition. MRI scans show that people who regularly engage in challenging activities develop thicker prefrontal cortices, the brain region responsible for problem-solving and emotional regulation. The discomfort literally builds better brains. Conclusion. Nietzsche understood something most miss. Comfort isn't safety, it's stagnation. Your potential hides in the tasks you delay, the conversations you avoid, the growth you postpone. This week, pick one thing you've been putting off because it feels uncomfortable. Do it first before your mind can protest. Notice how the resistance fades once you begin, how capability emerges where you expected only struggle. The door to your best life isn't labeled happiness. It's marked growth, and that changes everything. What looks like risk is actually investment. What feels like danger is often just the threshold of becoming. Step through.